Alright, so I'm going to be recording this on Podbean. Hopefully I'll be able to upload it to all the other places, including the video sites, so YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, BitChute, and we're going to do a reaction to the Rittenhouse verdict. So I'm going to start from the beginning. I haven't covered the trial very much on the channel, the YouTube channel, or any of the other platforms where I have videos. But the reason for that was very simple, because there were many good YouTubers and, or I should say video creators now, because people are leaving YouTube more and more. But there are many commentators who I think have a better legal background and therefore professional authority to speak on it, especially during the trial. And I didn't want to, one thing I hate doing is making predictions that later I regret. So, frankly, earlier this week, my prediction had been, if I would have done a podcast, I would have said, well, there's going to be a hung jury because many of these people are just going to be intimidated from actually delivering a verdict. There were enough people, I believe, during that, when I believe there was a hung jury, it seemed pretty clear that there were enough people that were on the jury who would say that they saw Kyle Rittenhouse as innocent to create a hung jury in case there were people who would say he was guilty. So my prediction was it would be a hung jury. Then, if not a hung jury, I thought the not guilty verdict would be the second most likely. And the third most likely, and the, frankly, the least likely would have been that the jury would have returned a guilty verdict, because it was pretty clear from the way the trial was going that the prosecution had made a very bad impression. And not only did they make a bad case, but the impression that they made, their behavior, had made a bad impression on the most rational observer. It doesn't matter necessarily what your political leanings are. I think that even if you're a person who disagrees with Kyle Rittenhouse politically or sympathizes with the Black Lives Matter movement, you could at least make some sort of conclusion based on what you were seeing from the behavior of the prosecutors that they had a very weak case. But to restate what was happening, I actually tried recording this earlier, but I was doing it with headphones that it turned out were not recording the audio very well. So we'll see how it happens, how it goes now. Kyle Rittenhouse was a teen from Illinois who also had one parent, his dad, in Wisconsin. And during the Kenosha riots, he journeyed to Kenosha in order to, from what I understand, volunteer to defend a business, that an auto dealership, used car dealership, from mobs of rioting pro-Black Lives Matter activists and Antifa activists. And that's how he found himself in this situation where in August 2020, he saw that there was this group of people who were lighting a dumpster on fire and trying to push it into a gas station and presumably set the gas station ablaze and possibly jeopardize a number of homes and businesses in the neighborhood. So Rittenhouse, first of all, discouraged the people. I think he threatened them and told them, no, you can't keep doing this. And then he attempted to put out the fire with a fire extinguisher. Later, one of the rioters confronts him, Joseph Rosenbaum, threatens Kyle Rittenhouse, approaches him, and grabs his rifle, whereupon he was killed by Kyle Rittenhouse. So that's the first case of self-defense / murder for Kyle Rittenhouse, where the person who he shot and killed had actually contacted the rifle, and this was revealed during the trial. It wasn't necessarily well known before, and this, I think, establishes self-defense. And for those who are saying, well, it's not really self-defense, how does he know that his life would have been threatened if he would have not shot Joseph Rosenbaum? Well, first of all, you have self-defense if a person not only grabs your body, but grabs a physical article that's on you. Let's say, for example, a woman walking on the street is carrying a purse, and somebody tries to snatch it. And this woman responds by hitting him over the head or kicking him in the nuts or some other way of... So that's self-defense because she's been assaulted. Her physical person has been assaulted. Her physical person isn't only her actual body. He doesn't have to grab her arm or grab her face or come up behind her and grab her behind the neck. He can grab her purse and try to snatch it. That would be possibly an assault. Then Kyle Rittenhouse. So this was something where the prosecution was making an absurd argument on its face that this was not justifiable self-defense because Joseph Rosenbaum had not touched Kyle Rittenhouse. He'd only touched his rifle. Next, Kyle Rittenhouse fled from that scene, and a group of the activists pursued him. Activists/rioters, and he apparently tripped and fell at some point, and then three of the people attempted to assault him. One of them kicked him in the face and stomped on him. That person has since been identified. I don't remember his identity, but apparently he was identified. Even before the trial, the prosecution knew his identity, and he never stood trial for that assault during the Kenosha incident. The second person was Anthony Huber. Anthony Huber attacked Kyle Rittenhouse with a skateboard, actually hit him on the head with it. Kyle Rittenhouse then shot Huber and killed him. So Anthony Huber is the second person who was shot by Kyle Rittenhouse and killed. And the prosecution's argument was also absurd on its face. Their argument was that just because he was assaulting you with a skateboard doesn't mean necessarily that your life was threatened. Now, I've seen that there are cases. I'll have to try to find them. Maybe I'll do like some longer commentary on this, but I don't think so. You can actually look them up. There was a case, I think, in Utah where a man was beaten to death with a skateboard by one other person. You have to remember that Kyle Rittenhouse was being assaulted by multiple people at this point. And then to say that, he's only hitting you on the head with a skateboard, does that justify you killing him? Is that justifiable homicide? Well, think about that argument when you have NFL players, plaintiffs, attempting to sue the NFL for unsafe working conditions due to concussions that they absorb through their regular work as football players, right? Do they have any right? Because after all, they know what they're doing. They know that they're taking hits to the head. And isn't it to be expected? But most people would agree that even a football player should have a reasonable expectation that the league would try to keep them safe at least. Now, in this case, you have a person who's simply being hit over the head with a skateboard. It's not as if it's part of his job to be hit over the head. And this was actually a ridiculous statement that was made during the prosecution's closing arguments, where it said everybody takes hits once in a while. It's okay. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he was basically saying, it's understandable that you would get hit over the head, and I feel that was quite frankly one of the most absurd moments I've ever heard from a person unironically trying to make an argument. So that was Anthony Huber, the second person shot, and the third person shot was Gage Grosskreutz, who soon afterward, with his Glock pointed at Kyle Rittenhouse, was shot through his bicep and wounded. And Gage Grosskreutz, I think, is the second most well-known person from the trial, because during his own testimony, he admitted, after close questioning from the defense, that he had his weapon pointed at Rittenhouse, and he made numerous misstatements and outright lies, and discredited himself as a witness and discredited the prosecution as a whole. And I think that in light of what happened, and thankfully the verdict came back not guilty. Thankfully, we have a verdict that was duly reached through the normal process, even though there were details within the process that were abnormal, where we can say it wasn't a mistrial, it wasn't some sort of hung jury with double jeopardy or anything, or whether you have to retry him or any other technicality. Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty by a jury of his peers, and the very fact that this trial was that this case was brought to trial, I think shows how bankrupt the American justice system has become, or politicized it has been in several places. And I was going to say earlier today, before I actually recorded this, because I didn't know whether a verdict would come today or at all, that should Kyle Rittenhouse be found guilty of anything in connection with the Kenosha incident, based on my following of the trial, he should be considered an American political prisoner, because he wasn't being prosecuted because of criminal conduct. He was being prosecuted because of political attitudes towards the people who he killed. These people were criminals. They were criminals both in terms of their conduct within the political realm and within their personal lives. Anthony Huber was a domestic abuser. The third person who assaulted him, whose name escapes me, also a domestic abuser. Joseph Rosenbaum was a multiply convicted pedophile, convicted of multiple cases of child rape. And Gage Grosskreutz, I believe, also has a criminal record relating to domestic violence, if I'm not mistaken. So, in the midst of this entire trial, much of the media has been dedicated towards demonizing a person who you can question the responsibility of having somebody like that in that situation behave the way he did and be involved, and the maturity that he showed, because after all, he did end up crying both during his own testimony and during the reading of the verdict. So we're talking about a person who's younger, not necessarily a person of mature age, right? And I think my own personal opinion is maturity is a very debatable quality. But you can debate anything you want about Kyle Rittenhouse's choices and his conduct and everything, but I don't think that you can debate that this, after all the findings, was self-defense, and the people that he killed were, loathsome people, right? And the fact that the media wanted to focus on him as some sort of white supremacist, when all the people in question, except for one of the people who attacked him who was not shot, all of them were black, all of them were white. Not one of them was a black person. The person who kicked him in the head, he was coincidentally black, but was not shot. So if anything, Kyle Rittenhouse is one of the worst white supremacists ever, because of 4 people that were in contact with him, during this incident, he shot only the white people. I mean, it's a very funny paradox that we're talking about here. So, Kyle Rittenhouse's trial, I think, was one of the worst decisions by a prosecutor in history. It laid bare how politicized they'd become, and also, besides some of the earlier things that I said about the ridiculous arguments that they made, their propensity, on top of that, their conduct was, besmirched by their decision to withhold evidence from the defense, which is illegal. Their apparent attempts to get one of the witnesses to change his testimony. I think that was Drew Hernandez, one of the on-scene reporters, who they asked, we didn't ask you to change your testimony. And he said, well, actually you did. So the unethical conduct by the prosecutors in the name of, and this is one of the things that the left has to start to understand. And there are people who are understanding this, people like Glenn Greenwald. The left has to understand that if your philosophy, if your worldview is so rigid and so moralistic that you think that that the ends justify the means, that by hook or by crook you're allowed to do everything in the name of so-called social justice, including convict a person who clearly was acting in self-defense against 4 criminals if you count the person who was never brought to testify. Then there's obviously something completely wrong with your vision of the world, okay? And there are people who, just like with Russiagate, just like with other stories, hoaxes of recent memories, such as the Jussie Smollett hoax, just like the Bubba Wallace hoax. Bubba Wallace, by the way, a complete moron, commented on this earlier. Just like President Biden, who labeled Rittenhouse a white supremacist after initially saying, "Oh, I accepted the jury's decision." Then he clarified, "Well, I condemned the jury's decision, but I accept it." Right? So there's a person, Joe Biden, who, by the way, initially during his campaign, he was saying, "Oh, I'm proud to have been a public defender." Well, as a public defender, he probably had a number of innocent people guilty people that he knew were guilty, that he defended, and it's reasonable to conclude that he got some of them acquitted, guilty people, and Joe Biden thinks that he has the right to pass judgment on anyone, whether it's Kyle Rittenhouse or anyone else. So this decision, I think it exposes these people even more, because we're seeing not necessarily just a political trial. It's a young person. He's 18. A lot of people who I wouldn't consider necessarily to be politically conscious have been talking to me about the Rittenhouse trial because they find it just to be fascinating. These sensational trials, like the O.J. Simpson trial, like the Duke Lacrosse trial, I think that they are an indicator of how the justice system can capture people's imagination, right? And it can change the minds of people, change their views, and I think fortunately some people's views are changing. I think there are people who are looking at this and saying, you know what, I think that there are some things that I've been ignoring that I need to pay attention to, as far as the way that left-wing politics, or progressive politics, or whatever you want to call it, has tainted the American justice system and brought it to a place where people should be worried. But there's also going to be plenty of people who, I would say, will overlook this and go with their biases and say, hey, we kind of have to, we have to hold the line here. And remember that Kyle Rittenhouse is, according to our version, a white supremacist. That's their attitude, that it doesn't matter what facts are brought out of trial. Kyle Rittenhouse is a white supremacist because they say he is, right? This reminds me of a scene in Donnie Brasco, one of the best crime movies of all time, crime mafia movies of all time, when Lefty Ruggiero, Al Pacino's character, says to Johnny Depp, after Depp challenges him over one of the other characters being considered an informant, a rat, and Al Pacino says, well, Nicky was a rat because Sonny Black, who was their capo, says he was a rat. That's what he says. That this guy was guilty because the person in authority says he was guilty. Not because of the facts, not because of the evidence, not because of a confession, not because of any relationship between reality and the accusation. So that's the way a lot of these people think about the Rittenhouse trial and the Rittenhouse incident and the Kenosha events. And that's why you still have people who, regardless of what Jacob Blake did, which is the seed of the Kenosha incident, they still believe that Jacob Blake was a victim of police brutality, when in reality he was victimizing another person, a woman, or I believe it was an underage girl, who he was basically sexually abusing, and the police were there in the midst of them calling the police on him. So that was the Jacob Blake case. It's one of the reasons, if you go back, only a few years earlier, to 2012, I believe, the Trayvon Martin incident, Trayvon Martin, unfortunately died. He didn't have to die, but the fact of the matter is that he died because he got into a scuffle with a neighborhood watchman, George Zimmerman. The media will always portray Zimmerman as this bigoted white man who was out to murder Trayvon Martin, when in reality, maybe Zimmerman shouldn't have been, as aggressive in his pursuit of Trayvon Martin. But in the end, it's not as if Zimmerman assaulted Trayvon Martin. Martin got suspicious of Zimmerman because Zimmerman was suspicious of him, and he assaulted Zimmerman, and Zimmerman, who was armed, killed Trayvon Martin. But no, the media will portray George Zimmerman, who isn't even white. He's half Hispanic and half white. They will portray him as some sort of bigoted white supremacist. So the facts are only a curiosity when you're talking about incidents that can be racialized. And in this case, it didn't have to be racialized. In this case, you have virtually everybody involved in the case, except for one person who was not really, his identity was withheld, this black guy, from the trial. So therefore, everybody who was involved in the trial was a white person. The jury, most of them were white. The people who were shot were white. The defendant was white. The prosecutors were white. The judge was white. The defense was white. Everybody involved was a white person. And what does the media say? Well, this is an example of white supremacy allowed to go unchallenged. There's no involvement of white supremacy in here. So is this to say that, according to this logic, Kyle Rittenhouse was a white supremacist over other white people? But that's about it. I don't have any more time for today. Please like, share, and subscribe. Of course, subscribe to me on alternative media. That would be Odyssey, BitChute, and Rumble. You can also chat with me on Gab and Minds, if I'm hopefully on there. And you can find me at the newsletter, which is below, the Razor Sharp News Chronicle newsletter. And also on my Telegram channel and on Subscribestar if you want to donate. All right, have a great day.